Martian Successor Nadesico is a celebration of the space mecha genre that released in the wake of Neon Genesis Evangelion. Did this affect the reception of the anime? Probably not, unless you watched it dubbed, because Shinji's VA voices the main character in this show, which does unintentionally add another layer of humor to Nadesico.
I mustn't run away. I mustn't run away. I mustn't run away. I mustn't run away. I mustn't run away!
Oh, what's wrong with running away? And whose business is it anyway?
The setup of the story is pretty standard stuff. The Earth has extended her reach to the stars above and gets attacked by aliens. The Jovians are a highly advanced species of space lizards who wipe out the human colony on Mars in a surprise attack that gave our main hero, Akito, some PTSD, which he was only able to get because he miraculously and mysteriously teleported to Earth during the attack. There, he decides to quit the military and become a cook. The end. Or at least it would have been had his childhood friend Eureka not have just become the new girl boss of a newly crafted, privately owned spaceship, the Nadesico. They bump into each other before she sets out to retake Mars, and he's back to being a pilot, whether he wants to or not. Martian Successor Nadesico is sort of three shows in one. You got Nadesico the homage, Nadesico the comedy, and Nadesico the drama. All three aspects are present across the show, fighting for power and screen time. But that's not to say that this is a segregated show. The homage can quickly become a comedic parody that starts off fun but turns into something a bit darker once the laughter subsides. Now, as you can imagine, balancing these three things would be difficult even for the most capable of creators. And Nadesico is the product of a director who was making it up as he went along, which would indicate that the final product should be nothing short of nonsensical. However, that's not really the case. It's not perfect, there are issues, but before we get into those issues, let's just talk about the good stuff. The most important thing for a comedy show is the comedy. Nadesico may not strictly be a comedy anime, it does shuffle jokes with romance and depression, and we will be coming back to this, but the jokes in this space opera land more often than not. It's usually slapstick related like most Japanese comedies, but there are also plenty of meta jokes about genre conventions or light roast of other mecha or sci-fi anime, and that's not even counting all the fast-paced wordplay and absurd statements. I do think it's true that you will get more out of the jokes and appreciate more of the understated callbacks and references to the super robot anime of the 60s and 70s and shows like Space Battleship Yamato, Macross, and Gundam if you've watched, well, you know, any of those shows. But I wouldn't go so far as to say it is a needed prerequisite. I mean, I could just as easily say that you need a cursory knowledge of the Japanese language to appreciate some of the puns or even the series' namesake. It's called Nadesico because Yamato Nadeshiko is a Japanese phrase that means the ideal, traditional Japanese woman. You may have noticed this phrase includes Yamato, like Space Battleship Yamato, but this time, the old man captain archetype is replaced with a young, pretty woman, very feminine. An ideal, traditional Japanese woman, to be sure. This might also be why Akito pilots a pink mecha instead of something a little more masculine. Or maybe they just wanted the robot to stand out. I don't know. But now don't be too worried if you've never seen any of the big shows referenced by this one. You will still be able to enjoy Nadesico. If anything, you'll just walk away with a desire to watch some of the big shows after you finish this one. But you're kind of in luck because there is one old school show that you will be watching as you watch Nadesico. It's the super robot show within the show, Geki Gengar 3. Geki Gengar 3 is a corny callback to a simpler time in animation, and it really does look and feel like an anime from the 70s. And it's a big part of this anime too. It's not just a show that's enjoyed by the characters, it is a show that is instrumental in the Nadesico's mission to retake Mars for reasons that you probably won't see coming. And on that note, this video is sponsored by Sakura Co. and Tokyo Treat. Now I don't know about you, but I love boxes, especially when they have stuff stuff in them. Even better if it's Japanese stuff from Place Japan. Luckily for solar aristocrats like myself, I've got Sakurako, a monthly Japanese artisan snack box that supports local Japanese snack makers and my desire to eat stuff from Japan from the comfort of my own home. Each month you get an elegant box filled with 20 traditional, authentic, artisan Japanese snacks. There's also some Japanese teas and a special Japanese tableware item. This time, that item is a little blanket you can wrap this box in and give it to someone who really deserves it. Yourself. Or since Valentine's is coming up, I guess you could use it for that too. It's not a coincidence that this is the item for the February box because every month follows a theme, and that theme determines what you get. Like I said, this is February's box, and the theme is Valentine's Delights box. What does that mean? It means there's a lot of chocolate. We got chocolate sable, chocolate carinto, chocolate kuzumochi, a couple of orange chocolate cookies, and some other stuff that's not chocolate, like strawberry monica, tanba kuromane arare, and pudding Baumkuchen. It's very difficult for me to pick just one snack that was my favorite. I do enjoy my chocolate though, so I am partial to the very rich and unique chocolate yokan. But I also really like the ume shiso senbei. They're little plum-flavored rice chips, and they pair quite nicely with the caramel hojicha tea. Now, aside from the snacks and the teas, there's a booklet that's packaged with the box which explains all the particulars of these tasty treats, and has some thematically relevant cultural pieces you can read about. You can sign up for a subscription for one of these snack boxes and get $5 off your first box by clicking the link in the description below and using my code. This does help the channel out, and now back to the video. Alright, where were we? Ah yes, the unexpected implementation of Geki Gengar. You know how a lot of anime, especially older shows, have a recap episode typically halfway through the series? Well, Nadesico is no different in this regard, but it is different in how it handles that recap. The first half is fairly in line with other recap episodes with the reused animation and all, but it also uses that old footage with some new stuff to explain the science of the show and life on the Nadesico. The more interesting part is that this recap episode is actually treated as a recap episode, but one that's being watched by the characters of Geki Gengar. I have never seen another instance of a show becoming the show within a show of the show that's within the show. Truly fascinating stuff. These guys really liked Geki Gengar 3. I mean, this joke show even gets its own OVA. And while this is all pretty funny, Geki Gengar isn't just a joke. It's often used to underscore how the characters of Nadesico are feeling or emphasize the themes of the show. It's also used in one other way, but that kind of involves some heavy spoilers, so before we get to that, I'll just mention that Studio Xebec did some nice work with the animation on this one. This is a very pretty 90s anime, very colorful, and it's well-paced too. Nadesico loves to throw joke after joke while speedrunning the story, and it's always keeping things moving along and not lingering in any one spot for far too long.
こいつはいけるぜ
山田さん完全に囲まれました頼むぞ天下しょうがないなもう
Now that's not to say that the show never lets up. It does slow down during some of the downtime, but it also has characters frantically and frequently talking over each other, which can be a bit overbearing at times. I wouldn't really call this a negative. It doesn't even come close to the Tatami Galaxy experience, but I might as well enter my complaining arc now. I like Nadesico. I really do. But there are some things that I dislike. And a lot of the things I dislike, I only dislike because I really liked the show. The first few episodes are frankly amazing. There is not a single dull moment. The comedy is at its best, and the drama is too. It walks a fine line between being a silly show with serious moments and a serious show with silly moments. You get lured into a comfortable place with the ditzy captain and the zany antics, and then it just breaks you with the crushing weight of the reality of war. If Nadesico teaches you anything, it's that silly does not mean safe. Fans of this show rightly extol the finesse with which Nadesico balances its drama and comedy, and I will too, to a degree. I would not say that there's a specific point in this series where the show loses sight of itself or of what made things work. It's just that the start of this show gave me certain expectations I didn't come into the show with, which got me very excited because I was seeing something different, only for it to gradually cease being so different and fall back in line with my original expectations. Since this was a comedic anime from the 90s, I only expected the routine jokes, people saying dumb stuff and everyone falling settling down, that kind of thing. And that is there from the start, but it's tucked in between dry and sometimes dark humor that wasn't so typical for 90s comedy anime. I think episodes 3 and 4 are the best examples of this. Now I gotta give you a heads up because I'm going to spoil the big thing that happens in those episodes, so be warned. Episode 3 involves the Nadesico leaving Earth for Mars against the wishes of the Earth military. This leads to some fighting and a coup on the Nadesico where some guys rescue an admiral and escape. And right before they leave, the main mecha pilot for the Nadesico and the friend/rival of Akito sees them leave, and with no warning, they just shoot him. This scene is kind of comedic because the pilot guy is a very over-the-top personality who loves Geki Gengar 3. He's quoting it all the time, and he's modeled himself after the main character, and he's always trying to be as heroic as that main character, but he's an idiot, so it never goes his way. And this is just another example of that. Just another joke at his expense. Now at this point, the show has already diffused potentially dreadful events by pulling the joke card before, so you got nothing to worry about. You just sit there and you wait for Guy to get back up and for the characters to either start laughing or to act annoyed. And then episode 4 starts, and there's no dialogue. Only dour-looking doctors and the sound of Guy flatlining. That's when you realize this isn't a joke. There's no punchline. He's just gone. And Akito struggles to deal with that. But no one else does. In fact, no one else really seems to care at all, except for Eureka, but no one really cares about her either. This is all really funny to me in a messed up way. Like, this guy wanted to go out like the hero in his favorite anime, to have his name just hanging on the mouths of everyone he's ever known. And before his body's even cold, they've already moved on to the replacements. This made me think, oh, we're doing a black comedy, and I'm not talking Tyler Perry, I mean In Bruges, a type of comedy that revolves around death and morbid topics, lots of dark humor and all that. Not really something I see all that often in anime, at least not really something I see done all that well in anime. And another thing that I don't see all that often would be a romance that doesn't take the whole show to develop. You see, in the same episode where Guy dies, Akito bonds with another crewmate, Megumi, who is also feeling pretty down in the dumps thanks to all the dead people in her life. And at the end of that same episode, they solidify their relationship with a full-fledged kiss while Eureka copes about getting cucked.
ただのすっごく悪い夢めちゃめちゃ現実感あったけどあんなの夢でしかありえないよね
That's rough, buddy.
I loved this when I first saw it. We weren't wasting any time dragging out a boring romance built on stuttering and misunderstandings. It was just there, simple and clean and handled in a mature way. I expected the rest of the series to keep this tone and this style of writing, but it really doesn't. I mean, if we just go back to Akito, the very next episode after he kisses Megumi, he fumbles his way into a misunderstanding with Eureka because he refuses to make his relationship clear for some reason. And then later, he starts getting flustered over things he really shouldn't be bothered by given what he's already done, and then there's a bunch of miscommunications, and it starts to border on being a harem, and eventually I just stopped caring about the romance altogether because it wasn't going anywhere. It's like Nadesico understood all the classic anime tropes regarding romance and comedy too, and made the conscious decision to do things a little differently this time, before deciding to just do the tropes anyway. Does that ruin the show? If I really thought that, I wouldn't recommend this show. But I do recommend this show because, look, it's not that big of a deal, just mildly disappointing, and because this show is still something special. Not spectacular, but sincere. A genuine love letter, not just to space mecha shows or super robot anime, but to the culture that surrounds it and defines it. It is a well-executed parody, and by that, I mean it is a parody that doesn't hate what it's a parody of, or even view it as lesser media. It's poking fun, not stabbing fun maliciously. This is not a deconstruction meant to subvert expectations at every turn. Sure, it brings up genre staples and views them through a critical lens. For instance, would the Earth really be okay with a private company sending a ship full of autistic teenagers on a mission to either eradicate or negotiate peace with a faceless enemy they've been fighting for a decade? Probably not. And the reasoning for such a disposition can be found in episodes 1 through 26. So why does the show still employ it? Well, because at the end of the day, you'd have to really hate having fun to hate that setup. When director Tatsuo Sato was asked if he had any fond memories of old robot or sci-fi anime from his childhood, he said this: "I watched Mazinger Z and Getter Robo when I was a child. Since then, I've started working and raising a family, but I still think back to what those shows were like. Actually, looking back now, the stories were very straightforward. Some parts weren't that good and sometimes they didn't make much sense. But I still haven't forgotten the sensation of how I felt at the time. I can't define it, and I talk a lot with Mr. Aikawa about it. I think it's a very important feeling to keep, and one that is necessary for children today. It's a feeling that I want audiences to have when they see my work." Well, Sato-san, from one patriot to another, I felt it. For the TV show, at least. If we're talking about the movie, While the Nadesico TV series is generally well-liked by fans, the movie, which came out 1 year after the TV finale, is generally less liked by fans. Sort of an Escaflowne situation here, except that this time the movie isn't a rushed reimagining of the TV series, it is a sequel. It's just a very disconnected sequel, narratively and tonally. Now, in order for me to give you the setup to this movie, I'm gonna have to spoil the ending to the TV series, as well as the big twist from about halfway through that series. So if you're just wondering whether the movie is worth your time, then I'll just say this: it's fine, but it's not a finale. Martian Successor Nadesico, the Prince of Darkness, takes place 2 years after the conclusion of the TV anime. In that time, Akito and Eureka died, and the deadpan lolly named Ruri has become the main character. The Earthlings and the Jovians ended their war and now work together for the benefit of all humankind. By the way, if you didn't watch the show and you didn't care about the spoiler warning, this was the big twist. The Jovians were not space lizards, they were just rebels who were driven out by the United Earth government and relentlessly attacked until they fled all the way to Jupiter. There they found the means to create a highly technologically advanced army of their own and get their revenge on the Earth. Oh yeah, they also kind of worship the Geki Gengar anime and view the real world in terms of anime. This fair maiden is like that one seasonal mid, and that entire civilization is like the irredeemable evil empire from that one show. Stuff like that. Is this a commentary on fanatical fans who got a little too lost in the sauce? Probably. Anyway, a group of them turned real radical once the war ended and formed the Martian Successors, and the Nadesico is called into action to deal with this new threat. And to do so, Captain Lolly puts together the old team. That's pretty much the movie. It's not very long and not overly complicated, but it is pretty different from the TV series. The most immediate difference would probably be the visuals. This is a full-fledged movie, and they did not skimp out on the budget. One thing to note though is that many of the characters received minor redesigns, except for the hot-headed tomboy Ryoko, who has blue hair now instead of green. That's kind of weird because she was part of a trio and there was already a chick with blue hair there, but whatever. The next big difference from the TV series is the tone. The Prince of Darkness is a lot darker than TV Nadesico. It's a more dramatic film that still has some of the trademark comedy, but it's reined in and usually kept to background gags or wordplay. Most people I've seen view this tonal change as a negative, but I'm gonna be a bit of a contrarian here and say I don't mind the change. I think it would be fair to characterize the TV anime as a whole as a series that was closer to a silly show with serious moments than a serious show with silly moments. Not by much, but generally speaking, that's how I'd frame it. The movie, on the other hand, is very much a serious show with silly moments, and I like that. This is the final act of the adventure. I don't want it to be a joke, I want it to be taken seriously, to make sure that people feel the weight of the situation and understand what's at stake. That should be why it's a movie instead of just another batch of episodes. And the tonal change is nothing new for the series. This is basically the same reason why the ending stretch of the TV series isn't as comedic as what came before. It's very natural to go from something a bit more silly to something a bit more serious. Just look at Cowboy Bebop or Trigun. What I have a problem with isn't the tone, it's how the movie adds nothing to Nadesico. The series was making the point that media is not inseparable from reality. Shows can and will affect the real world by affecting the people watching those shows, instilling certain values, hammering home certain themes, but at the same time, people are free to interpret what they want from these shows. I won't say that Nadesico did the best job ever exploring this idea. Sometimes it was too explicit and other times a little too subtle. But it still did a pretty good job. As for the film, it looks pretty, and it sounds pretty, and that's pretty much it. If you didn't watch this movie, then you didn't miss anything. Thematically, it doesn't change anything, and there's no sense of continuation from the TV series, nor any sense of finality to this movie. It feels like it starts after the start of a new story and then ends before the end of that new story. The TV show ends with Akito and Yurika successfully bringing about a ceasefire between two very angry sides, while the Nadesico jumps far away and the crew ponders what will happen next. Will the war finally come to an end? Will this peace even last that long? Will the captain and her childhood friend receive the sacrament of holy matrimony and have themselves a Mario Kart family? The final message in the credits of the TV show assures us that these questions will be answered in the sequel, and the first scene of that sequel is at the grave of Yurika and Akito. Also, the Jovians and the good people of Earth have worked things out off-screen, so the war's over, I guess. Jarring doesn't even begin to describe how this feels. And yes, Akito and Yurika aren't actually dead. Big surprise, I know. But you're gonna be shocked to find that Akito goes from a goofy guy with some PTSD to a mopey man who's in constant pain because he's been experimented on daily. And Yurika is just a statue for the entire movie. A movie that gives like 20 minutes of its 70-minute runtime to the new threat and the rest to just seeing the old crew and where they are now. Prince of Darkness is a mess of a film that has way too many blanks that need to be filled in by the blank of 3 years. The real sequel to Nadesico, which was not an anime but rather a game for the Sega Saturn, and it deals with the events that immediately followed the TV series and serves as a bridge between the show and the movie. This might seem like a strange move to break things up like this, but Xebec wanted Nadesico to be a multimedia franchise like Evangelion or Gundam, and the best way to generate some more sales for the new video game would be to tie it into the main story. The issue Nadesico ran into is that the game didn't even come out before the movie. So if you watch Prince of Darkness without knowing the context, you're actually getting the authentic Nadesico experience. There was another game released on the Dreamcast that does continue the story, but pretty much all the games were Japan-only exclusives that never saw an official English translation because they were on the Saturn and the Dreamcast. Do I really need to explain? Now, despite the mixed reception of the movie and the low sales of the games, people still wanted another Nadesico anime, and Sato was open to making a sequel TV series that would have tied everything up and concluded things once and for all. But he'd only make it if Stelvia, another show that Sato had written and directed, got renewed for a second season first. It did not, and Nadesico was officially canceled in 2005, and in the years that followed, the name Nadesico was forgotten. But the spirit of that show still lives on in our hearts, and our mind, and maybe in shows like Gurren Lagann or something similar. Will it ever come back? Probably not. Do I want it to come back? I'm alright. I feel like the 90s TV series already said its piece and we really didn't need anything else. Now don't get me wrong, I would have appreciated a proper conclusion, but at this point, I'd rather just imagine the rest. Anyway, until next time, Ave Maria, Deus Vult, and a big thank you to all the cultured.